Welcome to Mountain Roots. I'm Josh, and in this 32nd episode of my Exploring Appalachia series, I'm going to share with you some of the old ways the mountain folks, rural people, and farmers of these parts predicted weather, specifically winter weather, by the signs around them. You see, before the conveniences of radars and modern forecasting, these old-timers had to rely on other means to know what the weather was going to be like, or what they might be up against in the coming winter. Sure, there have been farmers' almanacs going back nearly a couple hundred years, but these wouldn't be as readily available as we might think of a newspaper or turning on the television or looking at an app on our cell phones today. Besides, these almanacs were quite handy for planting crops by the signs, but I'm going to save that for another springtime episode. Now, before you make any assumptions that this is just going to be a bunch of superstitious nonsense, I'd humbly suggest that this form of predicting winter weather by the signs is actually based in the power of observation. So in a sense, these mountain folk, some might call them hillbillies, to me they're just Appalachians, friends, and kinfolk. They're actually more in tune with their surroundings and with nature than the average modern person who's constantly checking and relying on their glowing rectangles. That's my way of saying paying more attention to their cell phone than the actual world around them. These keen observations of what nature is doing, what the critters, the animals and insects, what the plants and even the moon are all doing, inform these predictions by the signs. Many are learned over generations and passed on. You may be tempted to scoff at the accuracy of such signs, but then again I'd point to the modern weather forecast today. How often do they get it wrong? No, I'd say these old ways of predicting weather by the signs were fairly accurate. Not 100% accurate, but certainly reliable enough to get it right maybe close to 3 out of 4 times. And that's a good batting average, I don't care who you are. As I start sharing these signs with you, keep in mind the aim I have for this Exploring Appalachia series is preserving Appalachian culture, including its lore, sharing its many wonderful places, and telling the stories of its people. My mountain roots run deep here, and I think Appalachia is something worth sharing. So let's get into it. In Appalachia, we know it's going to be a bad winter if we catch hornets or yellow jackets building their nests closer and heavier to the ground than usual. You see, hornets usually build their nests quite high up in the branches, so it's a sign of a hard winter if you find one of their nests near the ground. Which, about that, just this fall I found a huge nest built right in the ash drawer of our outside wood boiler. Ironic, you think? It's also a sign of bad winter, some say, if stink bugs are trying to get into your house. Them, along with crickets, trying to get in the chimney or inside your house. I don't know if I've seen many crickets in the house this fall, but I sure have seen the stink bugs trying to get in. Old-timers say another sign of bad winter is if you see ants building their ant hills high. They're doing this to try to stay above the deep snows and cold weather ahead. And going back to the critters you might see trying to get in your house come fall if it's going to be a bad winter, are lots of spiders and black bugs. Again, I've seen quite a few spiders trying to make their way into the house this year. I better go check if I have enough firewood put up. It might be a doozy this winter. But these aren't the only signs from the insect world. There are others to observe, like the butterfly. They say when butterflies migrate early, that means winter will come early. But when butterflies gather in bunches in the air, winter will be here soon. But probably the most well-known sign for winter weather is the woolly worm. It's said a person can tell if it's going to be a bad winter if there are a lot of woolly worms crawling about. And I can tell you, I've seen a heap of them this year. If the woolly worm has a heavy coat, that's also a sign of a bad winter. And along with a black band on the worm, the whiter and the blacker the worm, the heavier the winter. I've already seen all black ones this fall too. Some say if the woolly worm is black on the front, that means bad weather is yet to come. But if it's black on the back, the worst has already passed. If you happen to find one though that's brown on the ends and orange in the middle, the winter should be mild. Other signs folks in Appalachia learned to look for involve the plant kingdom. They began observing blackberry blossoms if the blooms are especially heavy. This is a sign it will be a bad winter. Or if you're in the garden, take note of how deep your carrots are growing too. If deeper than normal, that's another sign of a heavy winter ahead. And if you've got sweet potatoes planted and they have a tougher skin, that's also a sign. Onions will grow more layers ahead of a big winter. Oh, and don't forget the corn. Shucks and silk will grow thicker, tighter, and further over the ends of the ears as a sign of a bad winter to come. Other clear signs that indicate winter will be bad are if you see apples, grapes, and cockleburs maturing early, or trees full of green leaves late in the fall, which I did seem to observe this year. If the dogwood and hollyberries put off a heavy crop, that's another sign of a rough winter, as well if there's a heavy crop of berries in general, and acorns and pine cones, or if tree bark is putting on thicker, heaviest on the north side, or has a heavy moss growing on the trees. These are all signs of a bad winter ahead. If you pay attention, the animal kingdom also provides quite a bit in the way of signs to forecast winter weather. In Appalachia, it's known that winter will be bad if squirrels begin gathering their nuts early in middle or late September, or if their tails are growing bushier. And if you see them building nests low in the trees, then look out. You can also bet on it being a bad winter if muskrat houses are built big, and if the beaver lodges have more logs, or they're covered on the north side of their dams with sticks more so than on the south side to insulate against cold northern winds. Which, if you've seen my episode on Hinton, West Virginia, take note of the beaver lodges I filmed in that episode from earlier this summer. Something else I've also observed around our farm that's a sign from wildlife like deer is fur or hair on the animals like horses, sheep, cows, even dogs. If it's growing thicker than normal, or they grow a short fuzzy coat under their regular one, these are all signs of a bad winter. There are other interesting signs the old-timers have learned to recognize as predictors of winter weather, like building a fire outside. They say if it pops, that means it will snow in 3 days. But I've also heard that's because the wood is wet. But anyways, or if you've got a chimney with a fire going in the fireplace while it's snowing, and if you hear what sounds like boots swishing through thick, dry snow, it will be a deep snow outside. It's also a sign that it's going to be a hard winter if smoke from the chimney flows down or settles on the ground. This means it will snow within the next 26 days. Or if it's cloudy and the smoke rises, there's a chance of snow that day. Weather itself shows many signs of the winter ahead. For example, 2 frost and lots of rain mean cold weather is near, or a late frost means a bad winter. If you keep track of how many frost or fogs there were in August, there will be a snowy day for each one in winter. And if there are at least 3 severe fogs in June or July, that means an early snow. The moon can also give a sign about winter. The number of days old the moon is at the first snow tells how many snows there will be that winter. And some say if the first snow stays on the ground for 3 days, another snow will come to top it. Others say it's a sign if it frosts before November 23rd that it will be a bad winter. But I suspect this might be specific to where you live because up on our mountain, we get an early frost every year in mid-October before both mild and bad winters. Also, pay attention to the thunderstorms in late fall. If there's lots of rolling thunder, it means a bad winter is coming. And they say opposites attract, so another sign to look for is if the summer is long and hot, the hotter the summer, the colder the winter. And another thing to look for right after Christmas is what the 12 days following Christmas are like. These 12 days are supposed to indicate what each month in the next year will be like. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Predicting Winter Weather by the Signs. These are just a few of the signs folks have compiled and not a full list, but I'm sure some of you may feel like a hillbilly weather detector would be just about as accurate as these signs. Oh, you don't know what a hillbilly weather detector is? Well, it's pretty simple. Just get yourself a string and a small stone to tie it around, and basically, if it's wet, it's raining. If it's dry, it's not raining. If it casts a shadow on the ground, then, you guessed it, it's sunny outside. But if it's white on top, then it's snowing. Or if you can't see it, then that means it's foggy. But if the stone's swinging, then it's windy. And if you see that stone jumping up and down, well, there's an earthquake happening. But if the stone is gone, then that means a tornado came through, and you best be checking in on folks. In all seriousness, these are just some of the signs that generations of people have looked for to predict the weather and the winter. Some still do. I find it fascinating and worthwhile to share. Thanks again for watching, and if you'd like to support my work further, consider becoming a channel member on YouTube or a patron on Patreon. The links are below and in the description.